Hello one and all, this is Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again with another video game first impressions. This time around, Biomutant, for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. This long-delayed third-person action-adventure open-world post-apocalyptic experience featuring RPG elements also features a cast of characters unlike any other open world game you could experience thus far, because the cast of characters are all animals. You get to play as a semi-customizable character where you are allowed to pick the class, some of their bodily features including the fur color, and deciding pretty much the template of what kind of character you want to play as. Do you want to play as one that is more melee and combat heavy, or do you want to play as a long-range character that utilizes guns, or a mutant character that utilizes powers? It's surprising how many options are available on the onset. You can be at 1 minute a more melee focused character and then immediately switching to utilizing guns before utilizing the powers that you've upgraded or attained through points gained by defeating various enemies or simply leveling up. There are actually a lot of systems that go into the overall experience of Biomutant beyond the actual combat. First, there's the gear and the crafting system. Of course, there is a plethora of gear that can be attained as you progress through the game, and some of the gear that you do obtain, be it weapons or armor, have slots that can have add-ons be added onto them if you have enough resources, with these resources being able to be bought or broken down by actually scrapping other items or found throughout the world. And upon adding these add-ons to your gear, you're allowed to increase the resistance to certain elements, or just overall increase the effectiveness of said armor. Speaking of resistances, there are several sections that present dangers being a post-apocalyptic world, such as more sludge areas, or biohazard areas, or areas just full of flames that have to be traversed. And depending on your character, depending on your resistance level, depending on what you're wearing, you will suffer. You will suffer greatly, and it will make it almost impossible to cross that area. The game does help you out in a lot of ways by presenting side quests that give you items such as a radiation suit that will allow you to make it through a biohazard area a lot better. There are also mechs and other vehicles that you'll be able to utilize that will help you once again traverse these more hazardous areas. Now, the world itself isn't just hazardous because of, say, elemental properties. Also, there are a plethora of enemies. I was greatly surprised about the variety of enemies that you will encounter. Now, one of the biggest things about this game is the morality system and also the dialogue choices. Biomutant embraces the light and dark of being a hero in a very chaotic world. And depending on your choices during certain scenarios, such as freeing a captive individual, you will either get a light or a dark point depending on what side of the fence you decide to work on. Depending on what side of the fence you're working on also means deciding on what tribe you're aligning yourself with. And there are several tribes you have to encounter and decide whether or not their philosophy is for you. And if you work alongside those tribes, you may encounter other tribes that have opposing philosophies, which of course causes fights. Now, depending on your charisma, depending on your light and dark, depending on your skills, you are able to even talk your way out of situations or have other enemies surrender instead of fighting when it comes to major tribe battles. That doesn't apply to, say, just random battles you encounter when you're moving throughout the world, because you will have to fight those characters. But major dialogue options, major dialogue moments do allow for the opportunity to talk your way out of a situation. Sometimes it may work, sometimes it may not. Though the dialogue choices are interesting, though the enemy variation is interesting, the overall presentation when it comes to mission structure is pretty much open world status quo. A majority of what I've encountered thus far has been go to this area and clear things out, fetch quests, and the like. That's really it. It's really not that much different, though I will say some of the bigger boss battles that I've encountered, specifically the World Eaters as they're called in this one, has been the most interesting fights that I've had in the game thus far, because they mix things up. The game also features some short-sightedness when it comes to mission variation and presentation in the regards of, say, taking over outposts that are a big deal of trying to overcome your enemy tribe. Because there will be moments where you're tasked with the idea of, hey, let's use a distraction to open up the gates. And you're thinking, okay, this is the first phase of an overall outpost takeover. And instead, it's the overall outpost takeover. You will say, knock over a hive of bees to distract the enemies. And you're thinking that this will be an advantage to go in and wipe up the rest of the enemies. And instead, then the game will tell you that the outpost has been conquered. With that being stated, there are quite a few flaws when it comes to Biomutant. Going back to the combat is really floaty. It doesn't have a heaviness to it. There is a parry system that allows you to block. Even though the block is only temporary, you can hold down the button, and once you hold it down, it means nothing. You have to block and parry at the appropriate time, which means that you will have to do it right before you get hit. And depending on how the camera is working, because sometimes the camera actually pulls in too close, even in open world environments, then it makes it very hard to see where you're about to get hit next. Also, one of the biggest flaws when it comes to this game and its combat is the fact there is no lock-on system. Why this isn't a function in the game, especially when you're utilizing guns, is hard for me to understand. The lack of weight when it comes to the combat also ties into the fact that the sound design and the sound mixing isn't really that good. Combat in general, especially with melee attacks, sound hollow and almost non-existent at times. Traversing throughout the world, you rarely hear any music, and when it does, it kicks in, and it's pretty much generic. From a technical aspect, the game does have some long loading times, especially if you die and try to restart, or you're just simply loading up a new save. I've experienced some frame rate drops, some bugs here and there, like enemies just becoming completely invincible, but completely forgetting about me as an enemy as well, no matter how many times I hit them. I haven't had any game-breaking crashes or glitches, but the game definitely has some stability issues. A lot of the problems that I mentioned, the developers have come out and said they are trying to work on a patch, so hopefully they do fix a lot of these issues. But with that being stated, overall, there is a lot about Biomutant to enjoy. The combat, though light in terms of weight, is really enjoyable once you get the hang of it. The enemy variation is very impressive, and the story, if you do enjoy these type of stories, isn't that bad. It's kind of goofy, it's kind of wacky, but it does have its moments of real heaviness and just general, wow, I cannot believe they're actually doing that with creatures to really add this human emotion connected to an overall story presentation. If you're not sick of post-apocalyptic open world games, with a game that actually has more of a lighthearted nature to it in terms of its visual presentation, then this would be something that you would probably enjoy a lot. But if you're sick of open world games, if you're sick of really the Ubisoft formula type of action, then this will not do anything for you. This will be just another one of those games that you walk away from and say, I wasted a lot of time. So there you have it. This has been Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again with another video game first impressions. Biomutant for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Now if you don't mind, I have to try to stop the World Eater, because I've sided with the powers of light. And if I'm not careful, I will be eaten and possibly even pooped out of its butt. And with my final stinky breath, I will have no choice but to say, oh lordy.